right, welcome everyone. We're Semblance of Sanity. I'm Caleb.
I'm Jacob.
And we're here for our podcast.
Number 12.
Number 12. So, guys, sequels, the name of the game. But before we do that, we have some announcements.
Mm-hmm.
We have a poll ending today for our newest show slot.
Yeah.
For hitting 4,000 on Patreon. And kicking everything's butt. Right in first place, we have...
Death Parade.
Death Parade. And Jacob and I are very excited to see this, because this is one of those shows that I feel like it had its popular little bout, but Jacob and I never got around to watching it.
Right.
So it'll be fun to go and watch it. And it's a short show as well, so it'll have a nice kind of cycle through of other shows that we want to pay attention to, because basically everything that was after that, they're all very close to each other. Yeah. So they're all very desired shows.
And they're all things that we are very much interested in watching.
Yes. Second place was Made in Abyss. And just so you can get the picture here, Death Parade, it's the poll's not over, but it's basically over because it's tonight, and I don't think Death Parade's going to get ousted anytime soon. Death Parade got 221 votes. Made in Abyss got 148. Listen to this. In third place, Ancient Magus Bride got 146. Yeah. And then we go into fourth place with Berserk with 137. And then fifth place, Your Lie in April with 136.
136. Yeah.
So it's like
Death
Parade. And then, well, not Sweet Parade, Death Parade.
No,
and then all the other ones.
Unfortunately, Sweetness and Lightning.
It got destroyed by the
sad face.
But Jacob and I are keeping the standings for the ones that did not win the poll in mind.
Just because of that whole debacle that happened with Haikyuu.
Exactly. But also, just to further clarify, we won't be looking at any shows for the foreseeable future to do double reactions for. Right. Hunter x Hunter was a very specific exception. Yes. And we kind of had that planned before going through, but we wanted to feel out the pacing of it. Mm-hmm. And I just hope this kind of lets you know our stance on it, that we will almost never do double reactions.
Right. And we are wanting to keep things to shorter shows for new slots for right now, just because we have so many longer running shows going on. Like
JoJo's, Hunter x Hunter.
Yep. Haikyuu too, to an extent.
Haikyuu also kind of is. It's like Avatar length. Right. But that being said, we have our usual schedule this week.
Right.
Yep.
Tuesday, Hunter x Hunter. Mm-hmm. Wednesday, Psychopaths.
Yep.
Which is coming up towards the end. Yeah, so there'll be another poll for that once that's done. Mm-hmm. And then Thursday, Hunter x Hunter again. Friday, My Hero Academia. Saturday, JoJo's and Ruby.
And invert the order. In general, you will see Ruby uploaded on Saturday morning, and you'll see JoJo's uploaded right around noon, I would say. Yeah.
And then, of course, on Sundays we have Haikyuu.
Haikyuu.
Yes. And then it all comes around back to the start. Except, here's the thing.
Yes.
So, on the 6th? A week from today.
A week from today.
Yeah, a week from today is when we'll be starting this new show slot. So tune in for that. And if you're on early access, you will get the first two episodes.
Yep.
So, double prizes.
So get checking in on that Patreon. Yeah.
No.
All right. So sequels in general. Oh, before we do that, we have to give a shout out. Thank you, Jacob.
Patreon
supporter, VAP, $25 tier.
But hopefully I don't butcher this. Lozo Valazo.
I don't know. I just like saying it in a
that sounds like that could be the main character in a book.
It really does,
Like it has that, either alliteration or rhyming. Like it's one of those two things that just...
Yeah, exactly. But either way, if you're here watching the video, you're awesome. Shout out to you. Thank you so much for your support. We appreciate it a lot.
All right.
Sequels. So we are both doing different forms of media for sequels. Yes. So we're going to talk a little bit about what makes a good sequel.
Right, just in general for storytelling.
Not specifically to movies, TV shows, books.
Right.
Anything really, plays even. But I think the main thing that we need to focus on is that the sequel continues the story of the previous one, and that's good. It's not bad to have the sequel basically be the natural progression that's sometimes even very obvious.
Right. And sometimes, and it doesn't have to, that doesn't mean that it has to be like a linear storyline.
Yeah.
The first one could have resolved things nicely.
Exactly.
And then you have a sequel that's a follow-up.
Right.
But the main thing that you need to keep in mind is that the whole point of sequels is to get the crowd that you got from the earlier one. Mm-hmm. So you want to keep it, like, have that sense of familiar while at the same time being new.
Right. The problem I see a lot of sequels going into is they take a certain aspect that they believed was like the moneymaker of the original, and they reboot essentially the same movie with a slight different color palette. They don't change the actual substance of the movie. And we've seen that a lot with movies like the Transformer movies, the Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
Yeah. If you went older, it'd be things like Jaws and things
exactly.
Like that.
We look at storytelling for the creativity at which someone or some combination of people's brains got together and they're like, all right, we have a story and there's going to be a progression towards specific kind of climaxes in the story. And at a certain point, we're going to kind of cut it off and say, okay, this is a complete story. But there's potentially spots where the writers kind of left open things a little bit.
Right.
There's also bits where, say, the characters were on arcs that didn't fully finish.
Yep.
And this is where writers have a really tough time. I say we need to give shout out to writers that do sequels well, because it's not easy.
Right, especially if it's in a trilogy, because then you have the problem of how do I make it still feel awesome and epic when you know that it's not really going to resolve things because there needs to be another chunk after this.
And you've seen it in a lot of things like The Empire Strikes Back, where the movie is a fundamentally different tone of Star Wars than it was, but it still had the same good versus evil kind of the hero's journey aspects of it, and almost a continuation or a more drawn out version of the microcosm that was A New Hope, for instance.
It understood what people loved about the first movie, and it did it in a way that was both, refreshingly similar, but different.
It takes it in a direction that I'd say is further than the original was willing to go.
Yes.
One other thing I've noticed that sequels do is they play it safe sometimes. And instead of being bold and going where no man has gone before, they take things to a more campier version of the first story. Because the first story being having the novelty aspect of being first, it already feels like a new direction because you haven't seen this exact same thing before, unless it's a complete ripoff of something. Then it's probably not worthy of a sequel anyway.
Right, but the idea that if it's getting a sequel, that meant it was a good story, right?
Yeah, and relatively good,
and people don't want to damage that, so a lot of the times they won't take risks.
Right.
That was something that kind of happened with the Star Wars movies. Now, I loved The Force Awakens, but if you think about it, it was just...
It was pretty safe.
It was pretty safe. Yeah, it was a very safe decision.
Yeah.
And then with something like Rogue One being a lot more creative.
Yeah.
But sometimes that doesn't work out.
That's true.
It's a risk because it won't necessarily go well. And
sometimes a genre change is that dramatic, but I would say not going specifically into just genre change, but a thematic change of a story can be very good. Another movie sequel that's considered one of the greatest of all time is Terminator 2 Judgment Day. And one of the fundamental differences about that is that the first one had that kind of chase scene sequence, but it didn't really bring into context the threat of the looming terror that is the end of the world. Like, someone has come from the future to save humanity. In the first one, it's actually more personal. You're here to save Sarah Connor.
Right.
In the second one, there's the aspect of the fact that you're here to save John Connor and Sarah Connor,
but
as a
also
combination.
The world.
But also the world. And it brings the full aspect of the mythology of the show together. I would say that's another thing. If there's a sci-fi or a fantasy show or science fantasy, develop the mythology and lore of your story more.
Right.
In a way that's not... just total hogwash. Well, no, I would say that Empire Strikes Back took a pretty big risk at that.
Yes. Yeah, that whole talk with Yoda.
That whole bit with Yoda could have landed really flat if, some aspect of it wasn't done quite well.
Yeah.
And there are probably parts you could pick apart, but...
And one other thing to comment on from Terminator 2. Terminator 2, the only thing that, was technically sort of the same was the idea that there was the robot, because it was 10 years in the future. However much
it was a few years after.
Yeah, it was a while after.
She had a kid.
Right, she had a kid, right? And the kid was now one of the main characters of the story.
Right.
But they kept it different, even though they kept the same robot, by making it so that it was now protecting them instead, and they developed a different, scarier robot that still had the feel of this unstoppable killing machine.
Right.
And a lot of times that doesn't really happen, because they used something different to achieve the same effect. They were focusing on the effect, not the actual thing that caused it.
Right. So for something like Pirates of the Caribbean 2, it developed the mythology a lot.
Yeah.
And I would say, if anything, the mythology was not bad. It was actually kind of interesting. It was a little bit, sometimes they kind of dumped exposition about how Jack Sparrow had his whole bout with Davy Jones. But with that, they ended up focusing more on kind of the ridiculousness of the first one, which kind of was a lucky shot in the first time. But because they didn't try anything riskier beyond just the addition of Davy Jones, the story, I think, kind of fell flat and became a little bit formulaic, and kind of pinned the story in a specific direction to where it culminated in the third movie, which was had some problems.
Right.
So with sequels, go for it. Like, make a story that takes some risks, honors the first one, takes it in bold new directions, and is an actual continuation. I think that there's a couple sequels out there. Mine, I'm actually going to show you a specific reason why it's a continuation, but it's also a little bit disconnected.
Yeah, it's almost completely like just a new story.
One of the things that's, I would say, very risky to do is to make it a continuation of the characters, but the story in particular is very, very, it's very much its own movie, or its own story.
So do you just want to go into that?
Let's go into that. Yeah. So I'm going to talk about one of my favorite sequels of all time. I think it rivals things like Empire Strikes Back, because it's probably one of those movies that I could rewatch over and over and over again, and really just get gripped into it every single time. The Dark Knight by Christopher Nolan is, I think, one of those movies that you can't really look back on and say, this was kind of just a lucky shot like Pirates of the Caribbean 1 was. I love Pirates of the Caribbean 1. But with The Dark Knight, you can see genius coming from multiple aspects of the story, the actors, the pacing, the setting, the philosophy of the antagonist and the Joker,
the way they
Heath
relate
Ledger.
The antagonist to the protagonist.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of layers, I would say, to The Dark Knight. But as a sequel, one of the interesting things I love to bring up to people is there's very little continuation on the first movie, because in my opinion, Batman Begins was one of the best superhero origin movies of all time.
It was really good.
It was very much an origin story. Like, you knew how this was going to be an origin story. Yeah. But the thing is that the only thing connecting the two movies is the calling card that Commissioner Gordon, or I guess Detective Gordon at the time, brings in to Batman at the end of the movie. And even then, that's not really a connection to the story. It's more of like a little plot icon saying the Joker is coming in the next movie.
Right. It might as well be like an end credit scene.
Yes, exactly. It has very little plot connection other than just saying, hey, we know that we're doing the Joker next.
Right.
The beginning scene of the bank heist alone is noteworthy to call The Dark Knight a special movie. But the point that they took a movie, I think The Dark Knight was almost 2.5 hours long.
Yeah, it was. I think it was 240.
No, it wasn't 240. It was close, but it was. I would say it's closer to 230. But anyways, we're talking 10 minutes here. They took you through a large, multi-staged plot story, not the Joker's plot, but like this whole story going through it. And meanwhile, we're having one of the most terrifying nihilistic villains of our generation being portrayed by Heath Ledger, who gave it his all for this film. And seriously, rest in peace, dude. That was a performance.
The fact that they could take, like, that Heath Ledger was able to take a character, because the Joker is a very simple character, right? But he was able to make it so viscerally believable. That is impressive.
That is impressive, and that's just one of the many things that makes as a sequel good. But I would say fundamentally, what makes this as a sequel done very well is, I believe it's one of the best sequel self-contained stories ever. Like, one of the things that all sequels do, unfortunately, is they prep you for the next sequel. Because they're assuming that, okay, we're now in sequel land, let's milk the gravy train. The Dark Knight doesn't do that.
Nope.
The point of how it ends leads it to where it can go into any story next.
Yep.
Almost any story. And it could be the end of the Batman Christopher Nolan stuff. That could be it. Because the whole philosophy of it is, not being the hero that we deserve but the one we need right now, or being the hero that we need but not the one we deserve, that whole back and forth bit. And the Joker's pushing of Batman to his limits constantly to see, okay, where will you break your rule, makes for a very simplistic, I would say, philosophical combat. It's this thing where there's these messages being sent back and forth.
Intricate, but it just does it really well.
It does it really well. Yeah. And then, of course, for just good stuff like plot twists, handling of side characters, the intensity of the thriller aspect is not knowing what the Joker's gonna do next.
Yeah.
Even sometimes when it goes into the absurd, you can feel that it works in universe for Batman.
Sure.
And I don't really have any much more to say than, you need to watch that movie if you haven't yet.
If for some reason you haven't. I know the movie made $1 billion at the box office, but I'm sure there are a lot of you that just were like, I'm not a superhero person. I don't care. This movie, standalone. Yeah. You don't need to watch anything else. Just watch this movie, and because you don't really
just
need
for
to watch
Heath Ledger's acting
alone,
you can get something out of it.
Yeah.
But I think this is where we would transition to yours, because yours is a true continuation that evolves the story.
It is a true continuation, and when you said that whole thing of stories that are kind of disconnected, it almost made me want to mention Mass Effect. But this one, I would say, does that in a lot of ways. It kind of does that too.
Sure.
And this is a book series. You may have heard us mention it a few times, but the Red Rising trilogy. The sequel is Golden Sun.
Yes.
And it is absolutely superb.
Mm-hmm.
You know how I said that there's that idea that in a trilogy that the second one will just sort of be the build up to the third one?
Right.
This one feels like the finale.
Yeah.
It feels like the finale, like the whole way through. Just pulling out all the stops. It is so good. And they took everything that made the first one great, right? Because in the first one there was this whole making something out of nothing and rising to the occasion and all that, hence the Red Rising. Yes. And they kept that. They did that again. One of in the hero's journey or something like that. One of my favorite parts usually is in the very beginning when the hero can't really do much of anything. And then they have to scrape by. And eventually they overcome their conflicts and stuff. And because they can't do very much at the beginning, the conflicts seem that much more important, that much bigger, that much more real. And then once, it gets later and later on, say if this was like D&D or something,
right? If
you're battling gods or whatever, it's not...
Feels pretty disconnected.
It is very different. Unless it feels less personal. Unless you're Gurren Lagann. But barring that, it feels less personal, right? Mm-hmm. And they did, the writer Pierce Brown did an amazing job in this book of making you be very much attached to the main character, introducing new characters, developing existing characters, even if you thought they were kind of the throwaway side characters, which alone is impressive and amazing. And then at the same time, taking all of that together, making a breakneck plot with more twists than you could shake a stick at.
Yep.
And when you're done, there will be multiple times in the book when, one, you want to throw the book, and two, when you want to just cheer and be like, just put the book down and be like, yes! That was so amazing! And then, of course, it has an ending that is... Fantastic.
I would add that one of the things that the book does is it takes the bit that was, like you were saying, the best part about the first book was the interactions between these characters and the developments that they were going on. and they really, like, I want to emphasize that even more, they really doubled down on those characters.
Yeah.
And the thing is that I'm a huge fan of stories that have large casts of characters.
Yeah, ensemble cast.
This is an ensemble cast story.
Oh, yeah.
And you feel like every single character has their direction they're going on, even when they're not on screen, so to speak. There's a whole section of the story where you're wondering what a specific character is doing.
Yep.
And it's like, I know what they're doing.
Like,
I don't know exactly the details, but I am very worried about what they're doing, because you feel the influence and the tug and pull of every character involved in the story, to where it feels like this is a giant, like, kind of spider web tug of war, like interlocking strings and everything.
Yeah.
That makes it feel kind of like the political intrigue in a good Game of Thrones season.
Yeah.
But it's better in some areas because these characters have gone through things that are so fantastical and out of this world, no pun intended.
Sure.
That when they're put into this kind of, I would say, just political situation, it's way more intense.
Yeah, we can talk about the characters till we're blue in the face, but the place where the Red Rising trilogy really shines, and I have not seen another book series do it to this extent, is that the plot is absolutely amazing. Like, this is a thriller book. Like, you don't normally think of books as being thrillers, because unless it's some sort of like 200-page, like, you know, like little tiny thing. But no, this thing's like 600-700 pages or whatever it is. I can't remember off the top of my head.
I don't remember either. I think it's above 550, but not 700.
Yeah, it's probably not that much. Yeah. But oh boy, like, you are on a ride.
It is going fast too.
Like, if you're a fan of Code Geass, you will love this book. You will love this series.
Yeah, one of the things that we mentioned was that I went to one of the little panel things to get signings, and I was like, "Hey, Pierce Brown, do you watch any anime to inspire this?" He's like, "Yeah, I watched some things for, like, the mech inspiration." And I was like, "Yeah, but you watch Code Geass?" And he's like, "No, but it sounds like I need to." One of the people in the crowd
was like,
freaked out and was like, "Yes, yes," because they got the similarities too.
Like,
but I would say in some areas, because it's a book, it actually gets a lot. It does some things a lot better than Code Geass
absolutely, absolutely. But if you think about, like, it, you know, for fans of Code Geass, I know this is specific here.
Yeah.
But that first season, how breakneck it is, and how it has a lot of twists in there that you don't see coming,
and a lot of political intrigue and machinations and stuff.
Machinations and everything.
That's Golden Sun.
With like a scheming main character. Yeah, that's Golden Sun
to a T almost.
To a T, and I just want to stress this again, because it'll sound weird, but this is a finale to a story, except it's the second book. It's the middle book to a trilogy.
So I don't know if that's spoilery, but I'll just tell you the thing that sets apart this trilogy for me is solely this second book.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of young adult kind of sci-fi things, or you know, whatever.
And a lot of times they flop on the second
one.
And
a lot of times they flop on the second one, but even worse, they just tend to go downhill over time.
Sure.
This is one of the few that I've seen that it peaked at the second one and then just kind of leveled out at the third.
Right, exactly.
In a good way.
In a good way.
But like, having its peak be in the second book gets you so hyped and excited for the third one that I feel like other stories should take note of that.
Yes, absolutely. Because the author, he understood what made the first book so popular.
Good. Yeah.
And he tripled down on it in Golden Sun.
Yeah.
Like, oh boy.
So understanding your audience, just to bring this all full circle with sequels, understanding your audience and taking the story in a direction that they're ready for, but they're also not necessarily
gonna see coming.
Yeah. Basically, you can have someone know that Luke is going to train to become a Jedi at some point in the future, but they're not ready for the cave. They're not ready for, no, I am your father.
And something like that we might make fun of, because it's like, okay, that happened so long ago, you don't remember the idea that, like, wait a minute, imagine not knowing that Darth Vader is Luke's father.
Yeah.
And not knowing that whole, you know, trope like that hasn't been made fun of so many times.
Yeah. I talked with, this is kind of getting a little off topic, but I talked to a lady who was insanely into Star Wars. She loved the original trilogy. And I was like, what was it like when you found out that Darth Vader was Luke's father for the first time? And she got all wide-eyed. She's like, we didn't know what to do. Half of us thought he was lying. The other half were like, but wait, Obi-Wan told him false information. Wait, was Obi-Wan tricking him? And imagine like your parents basically having theory discussions, like everyone was, about how crazy this twist was. That's how big it was.
Yeah.
So when sequels really hit that sweet spot of continuing the story, building the characters, developing things in a new direction, and also having a thematic shift.
Yeah.
I feel like the thematic shift is needed. I feel like having a story that is exactly the same themes of the previous one is a little bit of a missed opportunity, because you don't need to have the themes be the same.
But what if you're Gurren Lagann?
If you're Gurren Lagann, you don't get a sequel, because Gurren Lagann ended and it was amazing. So
Sure.
bad correlation there, Jacob.
Fair enough.
But I would say something like, I don't know, something that's like, I'd say the Transformers movies. The Transformers movies have the exact same thematic feel all the way through. Imagine if they actually had a dark, like very scary Transformers film.
Here's maybe another example that might be a bit better. Born Identity.
Oh,
so,
sure.
Born Identity,
sure.
It was, the first one was definitely a spy movie. The second one, definitely a spy movie. A lot of the things in the second one were just generally like executed better than the first one.
But thematically, it was kind of the same movie.
It was kind of the same thing. And one of the reasons that people liked the first one so much was because thematically they didn't get what it was. Like the first time you're watching it, you don't know what's going on. Is he a spy? Is he, what is it?
Right.
So
I would say taking specific aspects of the story in new directions is a good idea. We just watched Stranger Things. We're not going to do a full-on review of that or anything. But there was an episode that thematically was too much of a shift.
Right.
And I think that the problem was that the episode itself was fine.
Yeah, that would be a fantastic episode in another show.
Or at a different point in the story.
Right.
Like way later in the story or something. But because it's in there, you have to realize that your audience might not be ready for that dramatic of a thematic shift.
Exactly.
But having the thematic shift be centered around the characters rather than the plot is, like, I'm just saying, I'm not a pro, but I'm going to assume that this is a pro tip. Having the thematic shift be around the characters rather than the entire story itself is I think a better thing, because people change like way more, I would say, smoothly than a story does.
Well, and also there's probably no story under the sun that hasn't already been done. So the characters are what make it unique, what make it really unique. So
yeah, if you get into the point where you're a movie file and you've seen like would it be like a story file or something? Yeah, you've seen every
or just a
lot, you start to realize there's 10 stories out there, and that's about it. And it gets you get a little bit maybe pessimistic about it. But if anything, you could have a more positive thing like we have, I would say, where you notice anything that's different. You go, ooh, that's different.
Yeah.
And characters are, I would say, one of the best ways to do that. And I would say sequels that are bad tend to rip off the plot of the previous one and do nothing to the characters.
Yep.
So if you want to write or create or do a story or something, and you're going to do a sequel at some point, like you're planning it, plan it. I think planned sequels are better than unplanned sequels generally, but it's not necessarily the case. But having the characters develop before the story, make the story development change as the characters change, make the characters be proactive enough that they generate the story around them, therefore requiring the story to change. And that's all I have to say about sequels. What about you?
Well, I think we could talk for a very long time about sequels, but I think we hit the main core points. Remember why they liked the first one.
Yeah. And here's another thing. Like, if you're creating a story like Jacob is, writing a book, it's okay to not set it up for sequels.
Yes, that is absolutely okay.
One of the things that's a real problem, I'd say, right now in Hollywood is there's a lot of fear about whether or not their project that they're going to spend $100 million on will make money.
Right.
So they plan them out with sequels in mind,
right.
which is basically like the video game version of delayed DLC. No one really likes it, and it's bad in general for the whole thing. But
yes.
if you plan a story with no sequels in mind and you keep it that way,
that can be one of the most amazing things ever.
It can be one of the most amazing things ever, to where your story is remembered decades later.
Like, imagine
as one of the greatest standalone stories of all time.
Imagine what would have happened if Cowboy Bebop or Gurren Lagann
got sequels.
Wow. Can you just imagine how awful that would be? Or worse, imagine if Code Geass got a sequel. Oh, wait.
Don't make me depressed. Anyways, thanks for sticking around for this part. We're going to transition now into our Q&A.
Yes.
So, of course, the first person on the Q&A section is, of course, the
Isotropy Anime.
The Isotropy Anime, the biggest questionnaire person on these podcasts. You're awesome. Yep. We love you. You're hilarious, too, with your questions. Because the first one we have here is, which is your favorite ice cream flavor? And mine, I'm a basic person. I'm cookies and cream. Like, all the way. Like,
I am too, but because you asked this question, I have to say it. Neapolitan.
Oh, you gotta make a reference. Yeah. All right. Which My Hero Academia character has the best hairstyle?
I think we can both agree, hands down, that currently it is Bakugo.
The best hairstyle. It's basically my hairstyle.
Yeah.
I would say that's it's pretty good. Yeah, it's pretty good. I gotta say, like, I'm really partial to the kind of just the present Mike, like, ridiculous.
Okay,
like,
yeah, the Yzma haircut.
Yeah. It's really funny, and I really want to see, since we haven't seen this episode yet, but I want to see him do his fight, because just that hairstyle being involved in any kind of fight just screams hilarity. All right, so far, which Hunter x Hunter character has the best design? Oh, well, the thing is, actually, Hunter x Hunter, I'm really surprised that they keep coming up with new, unique designs.
Yeah,
I feel like that's where this good creator of the story, he did a really good job.
He did.
Very, very good different designs. I would say some of them are pretty, basic. They don't really stand out. It's kind of easy to say Hisoka, but I'm trying to think of any others.
Hisoka is a fantastic
Hisoka's
one.
Is probably the best. I would say objectively where we're at in the story.
Killwa's mom is also a great one.
Killwa's mom, I was going to say that. Yeah, Killwa's mom is pretty... It's pretty terrifying.
Different.
It's pretty different, but it's pretty terrifying because... One of the things that Hunter x Hunter constantly confuses me by is the technology levels. And the mom is an example of the dissonance between certain environments and the technological advances of those areas. She has some kind of cybernetic eyes.
Which, by the way, that's a character design detail that ties into the plot related to a specific character. Mm-hmm. Which is awesome, because
it's showing, not telling, of some story that was inferred in a previous set of story.
That little reminder,
Uh-huh. Yeah. I would say that in terms of the simplicity of it, but the fact that I was able to read so much about Killua just on his appearance in the beginning. Yeah, I went, okay, this is a good character design to communicate the story kind of nuances of this character,
because that's kind of what character designs should do. They help with the first impression, so they want to get the audience on board with seeing more, but then also show a lot. I would say Hisoka is the easy first for me, but I really like Killua and Killwa's mom. Yeah, those two were quite something. I would say that there were some others that were like, they're cool. I love the kind of old mentor characters when they kind of have the goofy, but if they have to fight, they'll destroy you. Yeah. And Netero, I feel like, had that, but his design was a little bit too
kind of I've
Vanilla.
seen that.
Yeah.
I've seen that before.
All right. G. Malika, top 3 rivalries between siblings, child and parent, best friends, or bitter enemies.
Oh, rivalries. Well, how about we just talk about 3 rivalries?
Okay.
Like one that we each appreciate, and then one that we shared
both
appreciate.
All right. How about for the shared appreciate, Suzaku and Lelouch? Because that's kind of a rivalry.
Yeah.
Like, I know it's a brother thing too, like, you know, the split brothers, but it's a rivalry too. Like,
yeah, I would say that Suzaku and Lelouch is a really interesting one because I feel like too often Suzaku gets the fan hate because he has to stand against Lelouch for most of the story.
Yes.
And yet I feel like too many people maybe find like the one plot hole, so to speak, in his logic, in where he basically his ideology stands against Lelouch. But I would say that it's good in that you identify very strongly with the emotional reasonings behind both of them.
Yep.
And when it comes to the heated emotional clashes that they experience,
they're intense.
Yeah. They are so good. And the thing is that they don't take a whole ton of story just to focus on them.
Nope.
It's just constantly weaving back and forth, back and forth.
And you know that they're going to meet again.
Exactly.
And it's going to...
But there's no like big info dump episode about their background upbringing where they spend an hour talking about childhood stuff. It's like no, they sprinkle it.
They didn't even show their childhood. Like,
I mean, they kind of did.
They did, but it was
lightly.
sprinkled along. At the very beginning, all they did was, you know, we're vaguely establishing our relationship.
Oh my gosh.
You know,
but that one I'd say has the compactness of some of the more legendary rivalries in bigger stories.
Okay.
But it has that emotional resonance when they're confronting each other. There's a very specific confrontation with which one I'm talking about. The screams, the frustration, the intensity. You're just sweating bullets. It's so good. And then of course the culmination is god tier. It's so good.
Yeah.
But how about for personal preference?
Mm-hmm.
What's one for you where you feel like it's because one of the things with rivalries, like you think of one where I kind of spin my wheels here.
Yeah.
I think the thing with rivalries is that they could be still really good friends and with basically on each other's side, so to speak. But they could have a rivalry of thought, like a rivalry of opinion. Like they're not necessarily against each other or out to kill each other. And it could also be like in sports where they kind of hate each other, but they really like that the other person brings out that bit of them. It's in a way, it's this like the sadistic relationship between the Joker and Batman.
Sure.
In that the Joker kind of loves that Batman exists. Yeah. And I'm sure the Batman doesn't necessarily feel that exact same way because he's not as crazy.
Right.
But he might need the Joker a little bit more than he lets on, you know?
Yeah.
And they play with that in a lot of the stories. So have you thought of a rivalry?
Well, okay, so the one that came to mind was Rock and Revy from Black Lagoon, but they're usually like going in the same direction anyway, so I don't think that really counts. So instead, and this is one that you'll probably, you know,
sure,
you're a fan of this one too, but Zuko and Azula.
Yeah.
Like you saw that coming.
That. Yeah, I saw that coming.
Like, I mean, okay, like
sibling rivalries are some of the best.
They are so awesome,
especially when it's something like Lelouch and Suzaku because they're like brothers.
They're
this
like
is
brothers,
actual brother and
this
sister.
This is actual brother and sister. And I mean, come on, we have harped on
Avatar: Last Airbender
so much. If you
time.
haven't watched it by now, I don't know why, but the way that they resolve Zuko and Azula, and the bits of backstory that they sprinkle throughout and all that stuff, it is so good.
It's really
like
good.
I got chills. I got like beyond chills when it resolved. You know, when it resolved, I for the first like half a dozen or dozen times that I watched it, I pulled the katara and looked away. Like, yeah. So good. Anyways, your turn.
Yeah.
I took the easy one.
Yeah, you took the easy one. One of the interesting things that I would say is kind of tough with determining rivalries and stuff is that most of them resolve in such a way to where they either get over their differences and they become not rivals, but the point at which they are rivals is something to be said.
Right, there's so much conflict there, like that can be done, and it's all interpersonal conflict. Like that's one of the things that makes Rivals so amazing.
Yeah, I actually have a little bit of a tough time coming up with this. I really feel like I have to just pick up something that's recent because I don't really have too many rivalry stories that I really enjoyed more than the ones we just mentioned, those two. So I'm gonna really just put out Bakugo and Deku because one of the things that's weird is that Bakugo is kind of the typical shonen protagonist. He just has a little bit of too much negative emotions inside him. Yeah. But he is basically the shonen protagonist. Like the best side of Bakugo is the shonen protagonist.
He uses energy blasts to solve things.
He determinates it all the way, and he will be the very best, like no one ever was. Or he will be the
And he trains like crazy to get there.
Well, the thing is Deku has the aspect of the person that is given the gift that they don't deserve, but they flip that whole thing on its head by having it be a thing that he actually does deserve because of the character. Like the strength of character, not the character as in the individual, but the actual character, the substance that he has.
Whereas Bakugo
has a lot of holes.
Oh yeah,
there's a lot of holes. You can pour some good substance into that, and it kind of leaks out everywhere.
Yep.
He has a lot of maturing to do, and Deku does as well. But the thing that keeps having them butt heads is the idea at which Bakugo sees Deku constantly in the way of him and his goal, and yet Deku keeps rubbing him the wrong way because it's like, but you actually are there. So how did you get there?
Right.
It's the idea that Bakugo can't reconcile Deku's position with the effort that it took him
Bakugo
to get there.
Has seen,
Yes, exactly. Bakugo doesn't see that stuff behind the scenes.
Right.
So they're constantly at odds. And the thing is that they could make the best of friends, actually, if they just sat down and communicated.
They'd be one hell of a team.
But because of kind of Bakugo's shortcomings, that's probably not going to happen. And also, Deku isn't the best communicator in the world.
Right.
So it's not going to be facilitated
he can't
well
exactly,
by Deku kind of like...
He can't meet Bakugo on Bakugo's level. Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's it. I'd say it's a good one because it has the foundation of a very fantastic rivalry into friendship.
Sure.
Yeah. We took a long time on that question.
Yeah, we did.
The second one from Malika is, which anime character is most similar to you in terms of personality? Ida.
Yeah.
Ida from My Hero Academia. That is me to a T.
I don't know. Help me out here.
Rock.
Yeah, actually, no, that's absolutely, yep, exactly, and hence why I want to cosplay him when I go to a convention, even though it's like the simplest
Rock
thing
from
ever.
Black Lagoon. I know my brother quite well. That is
by the way, so if Rock is like one of the sort of protagonist type deals that could have utterly fell flat because it is something that has been done before.
Oh yeah,
so many times. But because it fit in with the setting, and because he just the writer just did a great job of it, and set him up with a character that can bring that side of him out and have conflict arise around it, it just works.
Mm-hmm. So, thoughts on Hisoka from WA?
Yes, he's awesome. Like, he's evil and sadistic.
I feel like
every time he's on screen,
I feel like the thoughts on Hisoka are basically that he is the character that could last the entire show as being the ultimate rival, or he could get done in the next 20 episodes or so.
Right.
It's that thing where we don't know. There's a lot of mystery surrounding him, and I feel like as long as there's mystery surrounding him, he's going to stick around.
Yes, that is fantastic, and I think one of the things that adds to that mystery is that idea that you're not entirely sure whether he's a rival or whether he's the villain.
Yeah, exactly.
And that does a lot just to make you not be sure.
Yeah. Susaya asks, do you like to write stories centered on a lone protagonist, or many where all of them can be considered main characters and none holds the spotlight? All right, so a typical main character or a group
Ensemble
like
cast.
type ensemble cast. That's like what Ruby is, I would say. That's like what, Red Rising is. That's kind of where...
Well, Red Rising, I would say, actually is very strongly on the main character.
Yes, you're right.
But then
you're
it
right.
has a bunch of other characters that it handles very well.
Like Game of Thrones is the ensemble,
yeah, Game of Thrones is...
True ensemble cast.
Yes.
The more you get into first-person perspective, the more kind of nuanced stories I think you can tell. I would say when you're telling a story that has a ton of main characters, you have to paint in broader strokes.
Yeah.
So it's basically just your writing style. I mean...
Right, and you can do amazing things.
Yeah.
Like, to say that you're painting in broader strokes does not mean at all that it is not as good.
Because, no, not at all.
I mean, heck, like, there are so many scenes in Game of Thrones that were absolutely amazing.
Right.
Even though you didn't spend percentage-wise very much time with that character.
But which one do you prefer over the other?
I don't hear... So
you're gonna non-answer?
I'm gonna non-answer.
Okay, I'm gonna answer.
Okay.
I actually prefer the many, where none holds the spotlight.
Gotcha. So I prefer... I don't like the one main character as much, because I feel like that's not as realistic.
He likes the dual main character.
I like the dual main character or the group main characters. In the book I'm writing, it's about a squad, right? And
that's the second one this person's talking about here.
Right, but there is still a main character, and I think you need the... Like, unless you're going for something like Game of Thrones, where they're going to be telling this huge story, you need the main character just to have an anchor point. But that doesn't mean that they should have the main character in quotes around them. That's just the person that happens to be in this, position or other, right? But a lot of times, like, Red Rising is one of the few exceptions where when they do the ensemble cast, the other characters don't get shafted.
Right.
So, yeah.
Good question. Walker asked, what's your favorite medium of storytelling and why? I would say the TV show. I mean, the book, a book storytelling is very good, but you have to be in the right mood for a book. I feel like I'm always in the right mood for a book, but if I had to go percentage-wise, I'm like 99.9% in the mood always for a show. One
of the things that I think I like anime so much is because it's so similar to the book format. If you think about an anime that's like a season, whether it's one cour or two, that's about the same amount of time that you would spend going through a book, whether the book is a shorter book.
Depends on how fast you read.
Well, okay, yeah, but like in the case of like say a shorter book, some 250 page book, that's about a one cour, like in amount of time, right? Yeah. And then with a longer book, that could be like a season.
Yeah.
And then it just depends on whether you like to have the visuals or more of the just direct imagination type stuff.
Sure. And I would encourage basically anyone that is interested in storytelling at all, take some time to read books, because I'll tell you there's an aspect of storytelling that you're missing out on
if you're just watching shows.
If you're just watching shows from the critical perspective. Because you are not ingesting as much info as you think you could be from the show level. You're actually missing out on things. And I would say Jacob and I would miss out on things more often if we weren't such avid book readers.
Right. And we started with books
before
we got to shows.
That's true. All right, so what is your favorite aspect of a story? The characters.
Yeah.
I mean, that's obvious. I mean,
potentially the ending.
Yeah. All right, also, why do you love stories so much? Because I feel like there's a core aspect of humanity that we are all part of a story, and we just get to write it by living. So creating a story is like creating your own world.
Yep.
And reading a story is like going to another world.
Right.
That's why I prefer fiction over nonfiction.
Yeah, because I mean, who wants to just I know there is a whole genre in anime called slice of
life.
Nonfiction
is called the news.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Or a history book.
I would say
you're either getting history books or the news. Right.
Yeah,
and both of those are pretty dull.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with the whole thing of the reading a book is like going into another world, and making a book or a story. It doesn't have to be a book. Is like creating your own world, and it's like, yeah, like that.
That's fantastic.
That just sums it up so well.
Some core bit of what it means to be human, to create something. So I don't know.
Yes.
Lil Duck asks, if you were to come up with your own magic system, what would it be? You know what's funny? When I was like 7 or 8 years old, I created my own magic system.
And
that
it was bleach.
It was literally bleach. It was literally bleach. There were these ninjas that would fly around with
their
swords, and their swords granted them abilities based on
the kind of person
they were, but also the kind of sword that they had. So if they were a person that was kind, but their sword was violent and intimidating, there was this crazy combination of the two that merged together. But in terms of magic systems, it's kind of hard to say.
Yeah, I would say the details of the magic system or whatever kind of system you have is not as important as the reason why you're making the system in the first place. The reason why we love things like, magic and all that, the force, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
The anime power systems is not because of the power system. It's not because of, what kind of moves they can do, what kind of damage it does, blah, blah, blah. It's the wonder of it.
Right.
It's the wonder and the mystery.
That's whoa, and how did he do that?
Exactly. That's one of the reasons. I love the way the Game of Thrones does magic because it's not wizards casting fireballs and stuff. I mean, I love playing D&D, but it's not that. We don't want
to go full Legend of the Seeker here.
No, don't. Why did you have to bring that up?
I just had to bring up the worst magic system in television.
No. That's just bad fantasy put into television. Anyways, but besides that, you broke my train of thought.
I'm sorry. Boy. I think the thing is, this question shouldn't be answered because if we were to come up with our own magic system, we would have to take a long time in order to figure it out.
Yeah.
What I think is the question is why would we come up with a magic system?
Right. What do we think makes an interesting magic system?
Right. And I think that there's a lot of things that could be used to come up with that. I think if I was given an hour to just sit down and say make magic systems, I could make 10 of them on the spot.
Yeah.
The idea is that it's not about the details.
Right.
It's about what connects these characters to this
magic system.
And why are we seeing this in the story?
Yeah.
And that's
why should we care about
Why should we care about it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those are the good questions to ask. All right, well, that's the end of our questions, guys.
Yep.
Those were great questions. If you want to have us answer any of your questions, leave them in the comments below, and they will be answered in the next podcast.
Right.
All right, guys, that's it for now, and we'll see you again later. But until then, we're Semblance of Sanity. I'm Caleb.
I'm Jacob.
And we'll see you all next time.